Get started, or going to wait a few minutes, or it's never ready, huh? 10 o'clock, right? 10:01, that's perfect. See if I got this thing right. Got it. All right, so my name's Eric Swisher. I'm with ALL4 Incorporated, or actually LLC now. And for the second time during this 4C conference, I've been kind of pulled off the bench to have this discussion around TRI, PFAS. Our other PFAS emerging contaminant expert is at another conference where they're talking about how to test for PFAS in air. So I opted to come here, and she went there. But it's good, like I've been with ALL4 for 20 years. Primarily, I do a lot of monitoring and testing support in our CMS tech team, a technical director. But it's good to get outside your comfort zone from time to time. The good thing about this is that next Wednesday we're having a webinar, complimentary, that you can sign up for. I guess like from noon to 1, Eastern time, and the information will be on the last slide here. And the true TRI, reporting experts and relationship with PFAS will be on that phone call. So always got that as a backstop. So today, what I want to do is I want to kind of do a general overview of how the landscape of PFAS is changing with respect to reporting, right? And what is out there right now, proposed rules that are changing the way that we do what we do. And also going to look at some of the impacts. What does it mean? And then what's some of the things you should be considering, what action you should be already taking. So the TRI program, I mean, basically it's right to know, right? Everybody wants to know what everyone's using, so the community knows. They can make decisions based on it, and it's really built on transparency. That we're going to report things above a certain threshold, and we are going to let everybody know that here they are, and it's very accessible to those people, around. Well, that makes it perfect because PFAS is hot. Right? Everyone wants to know where is it, who's using it, and who's releasing it. So when you look at your TRI, the reporting aspect of TRI, there's a chain of decisions that need to be made. And the one that we're really going to be focusing on is some changes in the rules here around the thresholds, not necessarily the thresholds for reporting PFAS, but what gets included in the, what gets included when you count against that threshold, because that's the proposed changes. There's the minimums on the concentrations that certain PFAS have in relationship to the threshold. So currently, you can see that the TRI has listed chemicals, but primarily, if you look at the PFAS, you can see that list is constantly growing. They keep adding things onto that list. You can see over the last couple of years, they just keep putting things to that. The why because they can add to that list. Well, industry-wise, here's the type of thing. It's everywhere, right? And it's used just about everywhere. That's probably the hardest part of the PFAS exercise, is figuring out where all the sources of PFAS are. And, from different industrial sectors, you can see it's broadly utilized, and primarily, in your firefighting phones. That's kind of the one that everyone's kind of saying, hey, we had it there, and that's usually the one that's a lot of drive from. But if we look at the why does that PFAS list continue to grow? Well, it's automatic now. So, in 2019, the NDAA basically put provisions in that says, well, we're going to automatically make this list grow as soon as some triggers are met. So as soon as EPA finalizes, say, hey, I got more data, and I got more toxicity values, that's going to be automatically added to the list. So every year, we're going to see the PFAS list start to grow. And you can see here that, what was added in the reporting year 2022, what was added in the reporting year 2023, and obviously the important, past, number, because obviously when you start looking for these things, they become hard. But this right here is kind of the way that you're able to kind of ground truth or make sure you're looking for the right thing. But this list will continue to grow. It'll continue to grow automatically. So as soon as certain things are triggered, it will add. We'll see these things every year, being added to the TRI reporting list.
Got a question.
Yep.
So if I have firefighting club, so I need to test for all of these.
No, no. So, so basically what it comes down to what best readily available information you have, for yourself. There's no testing and monitoring that's associated with the TRI program unless you're required to do it elsewhere, then you have to consider that data. Usually you're just going back to your SDS, what comes from the manufacturer.
Those aren't very good.
They are not very good, but now this is one of the impacts that we'll get to is that it's going to have to be better now because before a lot of manufacturers were saying, hey, I've got a de minimis for PFAS that just basically means if I'm not above a certain threshold, and I can just say there's nothing above a certain threshold inside the substance. If I remove that de minimis, now it becomes, is it there? Not, is it there above a certain amount? And that's the kind of, that's what's basically under, discussion right now. Is, this threshold is 100 pounds. That's my trigger for reporting. But what do I include into that 100 pounds? Well, currently, you have a de minimis that says that, and you'll see that in your SDSs, the back or something, it'll say no, compounds above the, TRI reporting thresholds. This is in place today. So a lot of people just say, okay, great. I have material that may have PFAS in it, but it's not large enough for me to even consider it against my 100 pounds for reporting. So EPA is like, okay, well, we expected to see when we first started reporting PFAS, we expected more. We didn't get a lot. And the reason for that, they're saying, well, must be this de minimis. This has got to be the problem, right? This right here is the problem that's saying I got a bunch of substances out there, a bunch of industries I know use PFAS, or it should be reporting or could be reporting it. This de minimis is probably making all those things fall out because the materials that have PFAS in it, there's just a small amount. There's just a little bit in there, and they may not be over that de minimis threshold. And so EPA is proposing to remove that and basically define, chemicals of special concern that allows them the ability to remove the de minimis and then also go ahead and do some other things with respect to what information they collect. And like, if you look at, kind of what they were expecting is they need, this is what we just talked about with respect to, why they weren't getting the information that they thought they should be getting. I mean, the facilities that EPA was estimating, there's 800,000 pounds of PFAS that facilities are managing out there. And we only had 9,000 pounds reported in TRI. I think it was from 38 facilities or something.
But isn't that kind of the issue? Yeah, we all had firefighting, but we're not releasing it.
You're not releasing it. So it's the use too is a big part of this evaluation as well is, are you using it? If you're not using it, then it doesn't get reported.
But if it like leaks out of the code.
Right.
In your sewer system, yeah.
Right. Or you use it, or you actually, deploy it. So they're trying to fill this gap basically is why. Is it that this de minimis is creating this large gap because we want to know where is it going and who has it? And this is kind of what they're proposing to do as part of that. Now, there is, there are some, obviously the comment period ended on February 3rd. The comments that were submitted, they had a lot of, it's the burden and all the kind of stuff that really, plays to, hey, this is gonna be a lot of work to start quantifying, start doing these tasks. But some of the more meaty, comments had to do with, hey, why are you doing this just generally for all PFAS? Why don't you guys get more information? When you get more information, maybe PFAS by PFAS, you remove the de minimis, not just blanket do it for everything. Let's go ahead and say this one we got a lot of information on. This one we know is maybe a higher health hazard. We have talked, so let's just go ahead and do it and evaluate it, item by item. So now that we get rid of that de minimis, it comes down to, okay, what do I need to do here? So I may have been relying on the best readily available data to determine that I don't have anything above the de minimis. The de minimis is gone now. So now we start at zero. Is it there? So as you go through, there's information that's out there. I'm gonna say there's a lot of information. No, there's not. Right? So typically the trade association, the things that, maybe leading on from an agency or literature, it's on the facility to go through a to represent and say, hey, is this good enough data for me to do reporting on? That's the onus of the facility to say, do I have good data? And some of it now could be monitored, which is even more interesting because with respect to how it's used at your facility, we'll get into that in a little bit later. But for the most part, everyone's going to be looking at the SDSs, right? And that is going to be interesting because now do you reach out to the folks that say, hey, you made a declaration that there could be PFAS in it, but it's below this threshold. Now we need something from you to say, what is, how much is in there, for the TRI listed components. That's going to be, a challenge for, manufacturers and facilities to kind of, reconcile that information and pulling that information in from an SDS perspective. Just because the nature of how do you test for it, the detection limits of the testing, are you blanketly, going through and calling out each PFAS and saying, here's the concentration or below this detection limit or whatever. There's a lot of things when you start bringing zero into play, right? And then the facility would take that information and say, all right, based on what's in the SDS, do I think that's representative? How should I be reporting towards that 100 pounds based on the information I get from the manufacturer?
So that's a question. So some manufacturers right now representing their detection limit PFAS components about 1 ppm. Again, maybe 1 ppm, either way.
Right.
That's their detection limit. So anything under that they're saying is no PFAS. If I know that at my site I've got a detection limit of 5 ppt, what you're saying here is under the rule, I'm going to have to do an analysis and make a determination of whether I trust the data I'm getting on my SDS, potentially use my monitor, use a different monitoring method, or whether I have at least
So the rule's not making you do that. This is just removing the de minimis. It's up to you to choose the best available data you have to you. And if you use this and say, I can get better, right? And I'm going to go out and do other laboratory techniques to get a more true lower number that's not on the SDS. Right. Right.
Readily available.
You don't have to do the analysis, but in your case, you may want to do the analysis because it might get hard. Like if the SDS comes out with a number and says, here it is, it's going to be, you have to really be in a situation where if EPA comes back and says, well, where did you get your number from? Well, we don't believe the SDS. Why didn't you believe the SDS? What are you using in lieu of that? If you say, well, I went out and did my own independent testing and I determined that this has this amount in it. Okay, now the rule itself didn't require you to do the testing. It's the collection of that readily available, best available, information.
Has an approved analytical method been, I guess, approved yet?
There are analytical methods for PFAS approved. There's other methods that have been, like air sampling. There's other methods that have been evaluated by EPA. There also are methodologies that have been approved for like groundwater, water, things like that. For a specific, some of the stuff that, like if you're in a matrix of, stack sampling, you know what you're sampling and you know what you're analyzing. If you're in water, you have a matrix of water. when you have a substance, sometimes the hardest part is how do I prepare it for analysis? So the preparation of that sample for analysis sometimes can be the trickiest part of trying to get a number. So analytically, there are methods to quantify PFASs. Sample prep and what you're giving to the laboratory. Yes, how are they going to take whatever you're giving them and prepare it for analytics?
We do too, right? That means you can do a one-time analysis, but like if you're using a lot of, like we use columns, like they still column. Plus methodology to confirm that, I mean, how many times you validate it, right? Because the safety data sheet says it's less than a certain number. One, they don't tell you how that's numbers arrived at, two, there's IQ tied up, that's they tend to,
Right.
well, you can just this number, but on the primary super methodology.
Yeah, and variability, like, how often would you have to validate that number? That's what it gets into the documentation and what you're planning. I mean, you have to think like last year for ethylene oxide, EPA said, I think a facility should have reported. They're making the phone calls and saying, hey, why didn't you report? Because EO's hot, right? I mean, everyone wants to know about EO. And they basically, the facility said, here's my exact methodology for me to determine whether or not I report or not. And I have a plan and I do this. I got this number. I got it this way. I validate it this way. You have that the ability to kind of say why things are not being reported, because now they're looking for, if especially a gap doesn't narrow, they're going to be like, okay, like some people aren't understanding, the reporting requirements here, or, just or maybe not relying on, or even being so bold to say, none of this data is readily available, so I'm not doing anything. That's one, where if you're going to say, well, I just don't have any data, so therefore I shouldn't, I'd probably want to bring counsel in to make sure that you had someone else that's able to say, yes, I agree with your determination, that we wouldn't say this data is not readily available, and therefore we don't have any means to report. Because that gets a little slippery then. The other thing that this rule would do, because of the substances of special concern, is that it just jumps you right into Form R. So you have to put more information about where does your PFAS go. Again, another area of making assumptions. If I'm bringing so much in, I'm over the reporting threshold. Now in the Form R, it's more detailed than reported. Where does it go, right? Is it going out with the product or out with the, the waste? Is it in the air? Is it the water? And trying to account for where does it go. So that becomes, a little more complicated hurdle, because there's not going to be a lot of data for the most part, to support, kind of what goes to the air, what goes. You might be all saying, hey, it all goes out the wall, or it all goes, out of waste. So the one thing that is also interesting, because we went through kind of, what the impacts and what we're going to look at. We always got to make sure that we can't, skip all the steps. I just went right here because that's the topic, or that's what they're zeroing in from a regulatory perspective. But we also have to, facility manufacture, process, or otherwise use. That's key. But what we're seeing is that the states that are doing sampling for PFAS from water, from wastewater that's going in, right? Or facilities that are doing it, they may find it, but they have no idea where it's coming from. And if you're able to say, I did sample, and that's why understanding any data that you're monitoring. I did see it, but I know we're not manufacturing, processing, or otherwise using it. So therefore it's not reported. Because you have to go through this step first, because we're just basically seeing it in a lot of data that's being collected. And right now we're just don't know the blame. Where is it coming from? Right. Or is it something that is in the water because something that was years and years and years ago, and it's just there. So we have to make sure that we're able to benchmark it against those criteria. So we're looking probably now, it's obviously something that we're not expecting. It's not going to be a reporting this year. Like they're not going to finalize and come out and say, okay, now do it. There's going to have to be, and there wasn't any indication of once that goes final, once they move the de minimis, when will become effective? Most likely there, it will be the following reporting year, but maybe due to the nature of some of the comments and saying that, hey, for us to get this data and work with the manufacturer and SDS, it's going to take us some time. Then maybe EPA would phase that in, but we have no indication on the timing of after it's finalized when it would go into effect. But I can see them, basically saying, okay, it's final. Go ahead and do it for next reporting year. And if you have trouble getting readily available data, use that, but you have to continue to strive to, to get your SDSs or whatever you're going to rely on. So just some actions. I mean, it's always, and it's what we're doing, it's the identification. And I mean, basically, we need to know where they are. We also need to know if we've determined that we were relying on the de minimis, so that's the real key thing is it there, but were we relying on the de minimis, from a reporting standpoint. Also the data source, what is the reason for that? What are you actually, if you were to ask, well, why did you make the decisions that you did? What data are you going to bring into that justification? Inclusive of any monitoring data, like the explanation of if you're seeing PFAS somewhere, and you don't know where it's coming from, then that's where the manufacturer, process, or otherwise use comes into play, potentially. But then also documentation. I mean, there are methods inside of TRI to actually report reasons for not reporting. So if you have a chemical and you reported it in the past, or maybe you've never reported it, there are options for you to say, hey, here's a chemical, or here's a PFAS that you may think we have, or you may think that, but we don't have it, or here's the methodology we use to determine that it's not reportable. Now, some people want to do that inside of their, TRI reporting. Others want to keep that documentation, just on file, right? Typically, if you reported something in the past and it's not there and moving forward, you would want to have that description. But just to do it generally, maybe it'll be a little bit much, but it would answer the questions that EPA are going to have. And then additionally, like I mentioned, next week on the 12th, we're doing a TRI webinar that will include PFAS, the changes to PFAS, what's happened, but also include, TRI in general. And you can go to the website there and register for it, so it's free. And it's also available when it's our own recording. So if you're on our website, you're not able to attend, you'll be able to download it and watch it. It's also question answers too. So we do get a lot of, people asking, questions just around general TR reporting, and have a bunch of people there that are able to, answer them effectively. So, any questions on that update?
Got a question, the manufacturer process. I'll give you an example. You have a firefight, got the PFAS, just been taken out of service, it's just being stored now until the time. And you figure out how to dispose of it.
Yeah.
Fit in any of those categories.
You're not using. Now, you do have to kind of consider, I mean, if you repackaged it, or, I've had some situations, or, we've had some situations where in order to dispose of it, they were repackaging it.
If it was open. But
If it's just sitting there, you're not using it.
Yes, that's all cyber. I mean, that's
Right. And that's going to become even more, some of the changes from a regulatory perspective is how they start classifying PFAS, because right now there's things under CERCLA and RCRA, hazardous substances, hazardous waste. If that designation, there's proposed rules that can change, that could all of a sudden, start designating things as hazardous, like a waste or a substance, and that's just going to make it a lot harder to get rid of. Questions?
How long do you need to retain your documentation? Because I view this as all like, anytime, like, otherwise it's, and if you have it on site, you're in that category, if you release it. So you've got to do this analysis, once you release it, of how much you're releasing in storage. You're never going to hit a portable quantity unless you're really manufacturing. So even if you release it to run a firefighting, you're not going to hit it. You're going to have this stuff. You're going to have the records to release this stuff to the environment, and you've got no standards at your wastewater discharge. You've got no air standards. And it's nowhere out there. So you're sitting on this information. What do you do with it? And how long do you have to hold it?
I mean, there's like almost like they're forever chemicals. It might be one of those forever. You know, typically you say record keeping 5 years and stuff like that. That here you may have to keep that until it's not there anymore, right? I mean, you're gonna have to know that it's here. Here's the quantities and documentation to say it's still there, right? And we didn't use it, you know. But I mean, I'm assuming that the majority of the folks are holding it, just like everyone else is just holding it, just put it over there for now. You know, at some point, you know, the getting it off site and getting it to a place where it can be properly, you know, disposed of, or it's
Repackaging is otherwise you,
an activity.
so that's reportable.
Yeah. Well, no, it would be reportable. It would be accounted towards the thresholds. Yeah, if you release it.
It's on site.
You say release. Well, if you take it from the drum and put it into a tote,
It's an activity. It could have emissions associated with it. But you have to get over the quantity for the reporting threshold. So the de minimis would basically say, doesn't matter anymore. You have it in it. So any quantity you have to count towards your 100. So now you have to say, I had an activity. I need to quantify what that release would look like. And am I above 100, then I have to report it on a per, you know, PFAS or per,
release to that.
or spilled. Like if you go from one tote to another and you have, you know, your kick over a drum or runs over the top or whatever, that thing has to.
You probably just quantify the headspace in the container that dispersed.
And
came out and whatever that has.
And what do you do with what's left in the container?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like, so now you have stuff that's in a drum that you move into a tote and you don't get it all out, you know, there's a mass there that's not going to be 100%. And if you rinse the drums out with water and, you know, dump it down the drain, I mean, obviously there's something needs to be accounted for there. Questions, good?
Question. So I have a PFAS chemical that's part of a catalyst used in a polyethylene unit, and it's not TRI listed. Doesn't need to be reported anywhere else.
Anywhere else?
As far as any of the reports besides the state inventory report. It caught everyone's attention simply because it was a PFAS chemical.
Right.
So I was trying to run it down and I can't find anywhere else that it needs to be reported. I'm sure that needs to be anything.
There's proposed changes to TSCA for PFAS that may wrap it. Yeah, not sure. Anything else? All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Good, are you?
Yes. I see close to a hotel last night, like walk that.
Yeah, I'll give you the same.
And
So when you reduce yourself to and some you did a sim stream that's PFAS ago.
Okay.
It's PFAS. I mean, it's what I saw.
Right.
If you be 1%. TRI percent or whatever.
yeah,